Hello everybody, welcome back to episode 6 of Social 20 with Wright and Regis, going viral. So today, to continue on with our Unit 3 and our ultranationalism unit, we're going to be stepping away from World War II and we're going to be looking at some genocides. So this is going to be kind of touchy subjects. We're going to talk about some pretty disturbing content, so just keep in mind that what you're about to see might upset you in the next few videos, but again, these are part of our history, so we are going to acknowledge them. So today what we're just going to go through is just basically what a genocide is. We're going to look at some examples and we're going to look at the 10 steps of genocide as outlined by the United Nations. So first thing we need to look at is what is the definition of a genocide. So a genocide, by definition, is the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular group, nation, or ethnicity. So the word genocide actually comes from two Greek words, one for genos meaning family and one for side meaning murder. So it literally means to murder an entire family and an entire group of people. This word was actually created by a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust and couldn't come up with a word to describe what he and his people had gone through, so he actually created that term for this. So when we talk about something being a genocide, we're looking for a group in power attempting to eliminate another group of not in power, essentially off the face of the earth, or at least out of their occupied region. So why are genocides committed? Genocides are committed as acts of ultranationalism. So again, if you remember back to our World War II lesson, ultranationalism is a belief that your people are superior to other people, or my nation is better than your nation. Because my nation is better, that inherently gives me rights to take things from your nation, whether that be food, resources, land, or even life. So if it makes my nation stronger, I can kill your nation because it benefits mine. That's the whole idea of that ultranationalism, right? Extreme nationalism. So since 1900, we have seen a lot of genocide. So just in the last 102, 103 years here, we've seen the Armenian genocide, which took place during World War I, in which we saw the Ottoman Empire kill over 1 million Armenian people, Christian people who were living within the Ottoman Empire. From 1932 to 1933, we saw the Holodomor, which was the systematic starving of the Ukrainian people in the Soviet Union, in which over 10 million Ukrainians were starved to death. The Holocaust, which occurred during World War II, which starts in 1933 and goes right till the end of World War II. You'll see some estimates that are on the lower end, say 6. You'll see some as high as 20, but 10 million is kind of that middle number. Cambodia in 1975, over 1.7 million people were killed. In Cambodia, it was Pol Pot and his agrarian or traditional farming-style communist government that systematically eliminated their educated people. So anyone with a high school diploma or a university degree, or that could read or even wear glasses in some cases, was eliminated from Cambodian society. We have Rwanda in 1994, in which 800,000 people died in 100 days, and we will cover Rwanda in a different set of notes in a different video series coming up here in a little bit. Bosnia in 1991, in which 100,000 people were killed. Darfur, 2003, still going on to this day, in which 300,000 people have been killed between conflicts between Arab Africans and African Africans. And this has led to, like I said, 300,000 people dead and over 2 million refugees displaced from their homes. And then currently, we have the starting of a genocide taking place in Myanmar as of 2017, where the Buddhist government of Myanmar and the Buddhist army of Myanmar have been systematically trying to chase the Muslim Rohingya people out of Myanmar. And then in the last year, we've also had some early signs of a possible genocide occurring in China against their Muslim population. So lots of genocides have occurred, and that's just the last 100 years. There's other smaller ones that aren't even on this slide. So there's quite a few genocides that we've had, and some that you might not be aware of going on right now. So how do we spot when a genocide occurs? Unfortunately for genocide, most of the time we don't know it's a genocide, or the world doesn't recognize it as a genocide until it's too late. With the Holocaust, that was recognized as a genocide pretty quickly after. Things like the Holodomor between the Ukrainians and the Russians, that is still not internationally recognized. Individual countries such as Canada have recognized that act as a genocide, but places like Russia still to this day do not accept the fact that the genocide even happened or that it was intentional at all. But what we have the hindsight of looking back on is we can identify kind of 10 steps that every genocide takes place. Now, for your assessment, your unit exams, your project, you don't need to know all 10 steps. Okay, we're going to focus on some of the more key steps in this video. Some of the ones that are very similar we'll kind of talk about, but we're not going to spend too much focus on them. So this list used to just be 8 stages up until 2013 when the UN decided to update it to 10. So the first step is classification. Then we have symbolism, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and finally denial. So classification, the very first step in any genocide is identifying who is part of our group and who is not. So this is going to be categorizing people into us and them, which we've talked about back when we were still in class. But this idea of my nation or the us and other nations or the them. Now this is going to be based normally on ethnicity, so where you're from, your race, your skin color, your racial features, your religious beliefs, or your nationality. So a genocide is more likely to exist in societies where there is a dominant us and a less dominant others, not necessarily a society where you see a mixing. You look at Canada, we have genocide in our past with our First Nations people. We have internment of Ukrainians and Germans and the Japanese during the 2 world wars. But Canada today is very unlikely that a genocide would actually take place because we're so multicultural and our different races, ethnicities, religions are all kind of mixed together in that civic nation or that pluralistic society that we built. Societies where you don't have that, and you have a clear majority and a clear minority, you're much more likely to have genocide. Doesn't mean it will happen in those societies, but it just has kind of more of the starting point for those sort of things to happen. So the best way for societies today to avoid these tensions from escalating into a genocide is to have groups or institutions or laws or practices that essentially enforce or mandate tolerance between the 2 groups. These groups here, things like the multiculturalism law in Canada, the Canadian government, Red Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, those things do not exist in states that have had genocide in the past. If they did, then the early stages of genocide would have been recognized as illegal and some intervention would have taken place. So, some examples of classification. So we're going to specifically look at examples today from the Holocaust and then from the Rwandan genocide. And then again, each of those genocides will have their own separate mini lessons. So in Nazi Germany or Nazi-occupied Europe, the Germans began identifying the us as the Aryan people, white people of European descent. The Aryans were placed above everybody else, and anybody who did not match the physical, religious, or ethnic traits was declared to be subhuman, less than a human being. Now, the group that was primarily targeted were the Jewish people, as they were identified to be descendant of non-European races. Now, that's interesting because a lot of Jewish people can trace their ancestry for tens or 20s or hundreds of years back to Europe. However, the Jewish people historically come from the Middle East. So in the Aryans or in the Germans' eyes, their descendants were not pure European. And now in actuality, no one is a pure European. Through evolution, we've kind of seen the stages of people moving from Africa into the Middle East and then into Europe and across the seas. But for the German standpoint, they said that they were Aryan, they were European, and the Jewish people were not. Now in Rwanda, the actual genocide takes place between 2 different African groups or tribes, the Hutus and the Tutsis, but the classification actually was done by the Belgians who colonized them much earlier. So the Belgians came into Rwanda during the colonial periods, and they identified that the Tutsi, who were the taller, leaner, more athletic looking, more European looking tribe, were superior to the Hutus, were the shorter, stockier, and less European looking tribe. And because of this, the Belgians declared that the Tutsis were the superior group. Now, the problem is that the Hutus were the majority in Rwanda. The Tutsis were a minority. And when the Belgians left, they left control to the majority Hutus, who, after being oppressed by the Belgians and being told that they were lesser than the Tutsis, had some pretty harsh feelings about their former Tutsi superiors. So the Hutus were angry, and as soon as the Belgians gave them control, they began to look at not necessarily punishing, but starting to take a shift as oppressive towards the Tutsi people. So here's some examples from the Holocaust. Over here, you have your very stereotypical Aryan European. Now again, does not mean blonde hair and blue eyes. It just means of pure European descent. And then over here, you have a cartoon of a anti-Semitic book. Anti-Semitic means anti-Jewish, where they're essentially classifying Jewish people as almost kind of looking at the devil here, with the extended nose, the pointy ears, and kind of the menacing look on their face. And this is the cover of an actual book that was given out during World War II. So Rwanda here, you have the three different tribes that were present in Rwanda. So you have the Tutsi, who are the taller, leaner, the Hutus, and then there's a third group, the Twa. Now, I'm not sure about what happens with the Twa during the Rwandan genocide. I doubt anything good happens to them, but for Social 20-1, we don't really need to know about them. But here are some of the tests that the Belgians would do to classify as who is Tutsi and who is Hutu. So you got things like nose measurements here, eye shape and eye color, as a way to distinguish who was Tutsi and who was Hutu. So the second way we can identify, or the second stage of a genocide, is symbolism. Now this is when we are going to take the us and them, and we're going to start assigning symbols or badges to these groups, so that way we can separate those groups more easily. Some members of the Hutus and the Tutsis might look similar. Some Jewish people might be able to pass for Aryan. So in order to make sure that nobody makes that mistake, we're going to give them symbols that they have to wear or identification that they have to provide, which declares their race and their ethnicity. So the subhuman group will normally be the one that has to wear the symbol. Now, we should be said that at this point, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have genocide. Step 1 and step 2 can happen and intervention can be put in to prevent a genocide, but it's just kind of the early stages of it. So in Nazi Europe, the Jewish people would wear yellow stars of David's on their outermost layer. In Rwanda, the Tutsis were given identification cards. So on the left side of the screen here, you can see 2 Jewish stars, and on the right side, you can see a Tutsi identification card. And again, these might be clear to see on the slides, which you should be following along with. So here's a bunch of the different symbols that you could have in Nazi Europe. So it wasn't just Jews who were oppressed or were killed in the Holocaust. We also have political prisoners, professional criminals, forced laborers and immigrants, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals and sex offenders, asocials, which just really means loners, and then Roma gypsies. Roma gypsies are a people that come from India who kind of have a nomadic, very distinct or different kind of lifestyle, but again, not of European descent. Their descendants come from India. Now, step 3 is discrimination. So this is where we're going to see the ruling party, again, the group that's in power, start to pass laws and use their political power to deny rights and freedoms to the non-dominant group. In Germany, we see the Nazis pass something called the Nuremberg Laws in 1935. The Nuremberg Laws made it illegal for any Jewish person to own a business, to go to universities, or for anybody to employ them. So you basically couldn't have a job if you were a Jewish person in Nazi Germany. It also took away their German citizenship. And by taking away their citizenship, you took away their rights and freedoms as regular German citizens. So they basically go from being relatively successful people in the German society to all of a sudden having no rights, no freedoms, and no means of getting an education or any means of being employed. So step 4 is dehumanization. Dehumanization is exactly what it sounds. You're making the lesser group seem less than human. So the way this is normally done is you're going to start referring to that group no longer as people, but as some sort of undesirable animal or insect or whatever. So you'll see rats, insects, diseases, radio stations in both Nazi Germany and in Rwanda would start to play these ads or print these ads in the newspapers, on the radio, and movies, trailers, and all these sorts of things, until these terms became synonymous with the oppressed group. So in Germany, the rats were normally referred to as rats or vermin. And in Rwanda, the Hutus were called vermin or cockroaches. Again, not things you necessarily want to be called. There's not a lot of positive connotations about rats or vermin or cockroaches. So here's some Nazi propaganda. You've got the Jewish parasite on the world here. And then over here you have the Jewish person that's essentially eating or taking over societies around the world. Now, step 5 is organization. So a genocide cannot occur without some high-level planning. To systematically eliminate hundreds of thousands or even tens of millions of people, you need to be organized. You can't just start grabbing a gun and going to the streets. So what you need to do is you essentially need to have military or government support in order to do these, because you need large-scale resources, you need camps to be built, you need weapons to be mass-produced. So this is why typically a genocide is committed by a government that's in power. So death camps, killing squads, internment camps, military groups all need to be trained or constructed or built and to be managed in order for the genocide to be successful. In Germany, we saw things like ghettos being built, trains being expanded, concentration camps being put out into the countryside. In Rwanda, the government began purchasing machetes for their militia groups and training the militia groups. Hitler would also use his army, the Nazi army, the SS, which was his secret police, to kill off, arrest, capture any Jewish groups. And in Rwanda, the government didn't itself take part in the genocide, they did all of the organizing and radicalized different militia groups within the country. So up here you have Hitler talking to the SS. Down here in Rwanda you have the Interahamwe militia groups, besides some UN peacekeepers. And we'll get to the UN's role in Rwanda later on. So step 6 is polarization. So if any of you are familiar with what polarization means, okay, it means to keep people as far apart as possible. So you can think about magnets, right? The two poles have to be far away or they get stuck, or in some cases, if you have the same poles, they'll push away. North Pole is far away from the South Pole. So you just want to keep a distance between them. So the goal is to create a distinct divide between the us and the them. Now, the propaganda will start this process, right? Starting to make people hate the lesser group will naturally keep the dominant group a bit away from them. Intermarriage between the two groups will be banned. Now, when a genocide starts, not all members of the dominant group are going to support the actions being taken against the minority group. Some of them will have wives or cousins or in-laws that are part of that minority group, or friends even, and they might not support the laws. But banning the intermarriage stops the mixing, hopefully at least in the eyes of the dominant group, of the bloodlines between those two groups. Members of the dominant group who sympathize or oppose what's going on in the genocide will normally be the first ones killed in order to eliminate anyone that can possibly bridge the gap between the two groups. So during the Holocaust, we see this polarization by moving the Jewish people from their homes, which would be embedded all throughout Nazi Europe in regular neighborhoods, into ghettos. So this photo down here is a Hungarian ghetto. So the Nazis are going to blame the Jews for all the problems the Germans faced during World War I and in the interwar period leading up to World War II. Hitler begins to associate the Jews with the devil. So he's a quote saying the personification of the devil as a symbol of evil assumes the living shape of the Jew and the passing of the Nuremberg Law. So all these things would start to widen that divide between Jewish citizens and Aryan citizens in Nazi-occupied Europe. In Rwanda, you have the Kangaroo newspaper who began to promote ads and cartoons, calling the Tutsis cockroaches and calling for people to take action against the Tutsi. You'd see all businesses would stop their relationships with the Tutsis. The Tutsis were going to be labeled as cockroaches, and any Hutu who dealt with the Tutsis would assume the same status as a Tutsi. So even if you're a Hutu and you had friends who sympathized with the Tutsis, if that became public knowledge, you then almost lost your Hutu status and became a Tutsi just by kind of association. So step 7 is preparation. This is when the leaders of the groups begin to prepare for the actual killing. So the leaders will refer to genocide, and they won't use the word genocide, at least not anymore, because that's got a negative connotation. Legally, if anything is declared a genocide by the United Nations, they legally have to intervene with military force to stop it. So the groups committing these crimes aren't going to call them genocides. They're going to call them things...
Mr. McClellan, please contact the office.
Sorry about the announcement there. But they'll start to refer to their actions as ethnic cleansing or purification or counterterrorism. Now, if you notice, ethnic cleansing, when we talk about cleansing, we talk about taking something dirty and cleaning it. That's got a positive connotation. When we talk about purification, again, taking the dirt or the grime or the infected part out. Those have positive connotations. So it's basically rebranding genocide as something that's going to be positive for the people, right? Mass murder sounds bad. Ethnic cleansing sounds like, oh, we're going to clean our society up. Counterterrorism, essentially blaming the minority group for some sort of crime that they most likely have not committed, and you're just responding appropriately. So the extremists will begin to create fear. Death camps will start to be constructed, and refugees of the minority group are going to start to flee. Now, if they're lucky, they'll get out. In some cases, the borders will be blocked and they'll be stuck. So in the Holocaust, the preparation was essentially the planning of the final solution. If you remember back to our last video, that was kind of the end stages of World War II when the Germans attempted to kill all the Jewish people before they lost the war. So the final solution was the code name for the last stages of the Holocaust, which again, we'll get into more in another video. So on July 1st, 1941, the German SS leaders met to plan the mass killings, and what they essentially decided was to convert a lot of their concentration camps into death camps. So gas chambers were built, railway tracks were built to essentially transport Jewish and other undesirable people out of the ghettos and out to the concentration camps. So this picture right here is an actual death camp gas chamber. I believe this one is at Auschwitz. So in Rwanda, this starts in 1990 on April 7th, and this is when the government begins to purge all Tutsi government officials, so they're removed from power. The Hutus began to kick out UN peacekeepers who were there to try to prevent the genocide from happening. We'll get into when they were invited in, but they were invited in much earlier than when the genocide started. The UN peacekeepers are actually present for the majority of the genocide and can't really do too much. The Hutus create an anti-Tutsi movement, a youth movement specifically, that blocks essentially Tutsis from fleeing the country. They'd also begin to arm their militias with machetes. So persecution is when we're going to start seeing death lists drawn up. We're going to see members of victim groups be forced to wear these symbols. They're going to be deprived of resources such as food and water and attempt to naturally slowly destroy them. In the Holodomor and the Ukraine, this is kind of how Stalin was able to starve so many Ukrainian staff. Basically not actively killing them, but taking away so many resources that they essentially die out on their own. Programs are implemented to prevent procreation, so you'll see things like sterilizations of males and females so they cannot reproduce. The victim group's human rights are going to be abused or removed. There's going to be killings and tortures that begin to take place. Some massacres will begin to take place. And the perpetrators will essentially use this to test the waters, to see how the rest of the world's going to respond. If the rest of the world does not respond, they'll continue on with steps 9 and 10. If the world kind of catches on and tells them to stop, then they're going to kind of go back to the drawing board and come up with a more sneaky way, I guess, to commit their genocide. So step 9, obviously the worst step. This is the extermination. This is when the group in charge will begin the mass killings. So this is when, if it gets to this stage, it legally becomes defined as a genocide. So it's the extermination of the killers because they do not believe their victims are human. They do not call it murder. Right? You have to be a human being to be murdered. If you shoot a deer, it's not murder, it's hunting. You step on a bug, it's not murder, right? It's getting rid of the bug. And that's how it's viewed in a genocide. So if it's sponsored by the state, in which most cases it will be, the armed forces will work with the militias to commit the killings. Cultural and religious heritage will also be destroyed to try to eliminate any signs that this group was even part of your society at all. War crimes will be common. Mass rapes of women and girls are characteristics of most modern genocides. All men of fighting age in the minority group are murdered first in order to prevent any fight back. And the genocide will essentially target all members of the group and try to exterminate them. So this is a Nazi killing field out in World War II. And this is back when they were still shooting them to death. Now the reason they stopped shooting people to death in the Holocaust is because the bullets were too expensive. Which is why they moved to the gas chamber, which you can see over here, which was, as bad as it sounds, more cost-effective means of killing people. In Rwanda, most of the killing was done with machetes. So on the left here, you have some pictures of skulls and bones from a mass grave in Rwanda, and then on the right, you have the machetes that were actually used in the genocide. So the last stage of genocide is always going to be denial, because a genocide will always be discovered, or else it's not known as a genocide, right? If nobody catches you, then nobody knows it happened. So once the group is caught and the world kind of learns what they've done, they'll start to deny what they've done. They'll say, we did not do that, or we didn't mean to do it, or it was an accident, or they started it, or some other excuse that's all kind of crap. So generally, if you see somebody deny that they committed genocide, that's kind of one of the best ways to determine if they did commit genocide, because if you didn't commit a genocide, no one would suspect you of it, and if you did, you probably would deny it, because what do you have to lose? So before the investigators get there, the group that committed the genocide will start to dig up their graves, burn the bodies, try to cover up the evidence, scare witnesses, or even kill witnesses. And then they'll start to deny everything. They'll deny that the crime was committed. They'll blame what happened on the victims, saying they started it. They'll try to prevent investigators from getting in there to kind of research and investigate to see what happens. And if it starts to get too close, if they're going to be caught, they might start running away. After the Holocaust is over in World War II, a lot of Nazis fled the country. Some made it down to South America, some made it to North America, some just moved to other parts of Europe and changed their name. So there's 3 different ways you can deny genocide. You can deny the evidence, saying that it's made up, or you can destroy it, or you can say that the evidence is wrong. You can destroy the evidence, kill or intimidate all your witnesses, burn the bodies, destroy all the records, or you can essentially start to blame or attack the kind of righteousness of the people investigating you. So if I committed genocide hypothetically and you start to accuse me of that, I start pointing out all the things that you've done wrong, and that's my attempt to take away your credibility, saying you can't judge me because you've done this. Sorry, so we have two more here. Denying genocidal intent, saying that you didn't mean to do it, that it was an accident. This is what Russia uses to still justify, in their opinion, the Holodomor as not being a genocide. Say that the deaths were an accident caused by famine, migration, or disease, or they were out of our control, or they were based on old conflicts that just hadn't gone away yet. Or you can blame the victims, say like it's essentially they asked for it, right? They were weird, they weren't like us, they were dangerous, they were scary, they tried to kill us. My favorite example, and by my favorite I mean like the one I find the most ridiculous, is when they say that they also lost a lot of people and they try to spin it as a war, right? In this example, the Nazis would be saying like, we didn't kill the Jews in a genocide, right? It was a civil war where they suffered 10 million losses and we suffered 0, right? Like it sounds ridiculous, but these are kind of the techniques that some people try to use. You can also state that the killings were in self-defense, which again is going to be BS. Okay, generally it's a majority group attacking a minority group. The majority normally doesn't have to protect themselves from the minority, at least not to the extent that you're killing hundreds of thousands or millions of people. All right, and then there's some sources on there if you want to look into them a little bit more. Otherwise, we'll be back with another video in a couple days on some of the more specific genocides. So thanks for watching.